You are probably wondering, why do I have to learn another piece of software? There are so many out there. There's Photoshop, which is great for editing photos. There's Adobe Illustrator, which is terrific for laying out individual boards and creating custom typography and illustrations. And then you have AutoCAD, which is really great at drawing lines and hatch patterns and that sort of thing. And then you have SketchUp, which is a great high-speed 3D modeler. What could Revit possibly have to offer that those programs can't cover? Well, basically, Revit is a different sort of program. It's what's called a building information model. And what that is, it's essentially a database rather than something which is just creating graphical elements. In fact, here I'll switch to my source for all information in the world, Wikipedia, and you can look up building information modeling. Basically, the difference here is that most objects in a building information model, BIM, are objects that have information inside them, parameters. So for example, in AutoCAD, if you're drawing a floor plan, you might draw a couple of lines to represent a door, maybe a rectangle. But there's nothing really other than the lines that are embedded in that door. It just looks like a door should look like in floor plan. Now, in SketchUp, you would probably import a door or build one, and it would be a three-dimensional door, so it wouldn't just be on the ground as a rectangle. It would be actually up in 3 dimensions. It might have materials, but generally, unless you've gone out of your way to import information from the product's manufacturer, it's basically, it just looks like a door in 3D. It will look correct in floor plan, elevation, and perspective. Now, building information modeling, you really don't build much at all that does not already have information embedded in it. That information is in the form of data. And when you look at the properties of these objects, you'll see that that data can include any number of things. Obviously, the dimension is the simplest one, both in plan and elevation, but also information about the manufacturer, product information, and then even things about the performance. For example, the thermal performance of an object might be included. Anyway, so that's the big difference. Now, how do you get this wonderful software? Well, good old Autodesk has free software for students. So if you are a student, and you are, you can get it free here, autodesk.com/education/free software. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, and you'll have to remember your login from when you learned AutoCAD. And here we go. I actually am on a Mac, in case you're wondering. You're like, hey, doesn't that look like a Windows machine? It's not. It's a Mac. But I'm running Parallels. So those of you who have put off deciding how you're going to run Revit, you can install either Boot Camp, which means your system will restart, and you won't have all your lovely little Mac programs here, or you can install Boot Camp, but then and Windows on the Boot Camp partition. But then you can install something called Parallels. You have to buy it, and that will allow you to run it as essentially another window. Anyway, here I am. I'm going to install it, and I'm going to use the personal or individual use option here. The version that we have at school in the labs is Revit 2018. And the operating system, there's only one choice. I don't even know why they give you a choice. And I'm going to go with English. And there you go. What it does is it gives you a serial number and a product key. And what it will do is it will download a massive file, almost 7 gigabytes. So when you are, if you're running a Mac, be sure to partition and leave yourself enough space. I have a relatively old machine. I think I have 250 gigabytes of space, so I left myself about 50 on the PC side. If you have a bigger hard drive, you can obviously leave more, but most of my stuff happens on the Mac side on my computer. So anyway, let me take a look at Revit. Here we go. I already have it up and running. And what I would like to do is kind of just talk about the basic elements of Revit in this video. And then we'll get into actually using it in a later video. And first of all, the splash screen here at Revit has a number of features which are probably familiar to you. First of all, it has anything you've done recently on here. It has some example files which you can take a look at. And then, of course, there are resources, tutorials, what's new with this version, which will be useful in the future. There's all sorts of good stuff there. You can also sign in to something called Autodesk 360. And we will be using this, and it's the same login that you used in the past to get the software in the first place. So again, don't lose that. Anyway, I'm going to open the sample architecture project, which should be with your files as well when you installed. So here is the interface for Revit. And it is, fairly similar to some of the other programs we've looked at. First of all, there is a kind of drawing area here. And this is the sample project, so it opens up to a sheet of drawings. So this object here, you can see it looks suspiciously like a title sheet. And then on that sheet, there are a number of different things. There are what look like perspective drawings, and then it looks like some kind of schedule. Now, most of the tools are up here in this ribbon. Okay, these are called ribbons, and if you click on the name, it will switch from one ribbon to the next. Now, you'll see that some things are highlighted, which means they are active or they are tools which are available. And then some things are kind of grayed out. See how we can't do those? These are unavailable in this particular view, okay? So you can't do anything in any view, but you can do a lot of things in a lot of views, okay? So the architecture ribbon is the one which we use probably the most, okay? And that has tools which kind of get you most of the basic three-dimensional elements that you're going to look for. Now, the only thing is you can't draw on a sheet like this. You have to go to a floor plan. So let me talk about what's going on here on the left side of the screen. First of all, there is a properties menu, and that is just like in good old AutoCAD, right? If you remember from AutoCAD, there are properties. You can sort the properties if you have more than one object selected. And then if you come down here, there are different properties based on whatever you've selected. So for example, if I select this image, it will give me different properties. It says viewport, no title, and then it gives me information about that. Okay. Then down here, the other thing that is on the left side of your screen is what's called the project browser. Okay. So there's two objects, and you can close each if you are working on a tiny screen like me. Call them up as you need them, or you can just leave them there and you can stretch them to be larger or smaller. In my case, I can't get any smaller thanks to the resolution. And what you'll see down here, there are views in your model kind of organized by what type of view. And I'll just collapse these for a second here. There are floor plans. In this case, there are just two 3D views. Okay. Here, I'll go to one of these floor plans first so you can take a look. You can see here that it looks, yes, you got it, just like a floor plan. All right. This one, it happens to be in metric. What do you know about that? And there are a number of elements within each of these views, but 3D views are just what they sound like. A 3D view, I'll just click on that. So here is my perspective view, and what you'll see is that it looks, yes, indeed, like a drawing in perspective. Each of these objects is three-dimensional, like in SketchUp, And each of these objects has properties. So if I select an object, for example, this lighting, it actually tells me a lot about the object, like what product it is, and where it comes from, how it behaves. And if I scroll down in this list here, it may or may not have information about light output, although I don't see it here. Anyway, so that is how drawings work in Revit. And there are any number of different types of drawings. I'll just scroll around in the list here on the project browser. Detail views are things like very large scale things, wall to roof connection, that sort of thing. Renderings are drawings where they have, sort of like this, where they've applied lighting and materials to geometry. There's even legends, schedules, that sort of thing, interior elevations, building sections, exterior elevations. And each of these is what you would typically find in a construction drawing set. In fact, Revit, for better or worse, is really a tool ideal for construction drawings. It's not quite as good for doing things like design, where you want a little more ambiguity in how you draw. Something like SketchUp is very fast, and you can produce objects which don't really have any identity. You don't have to worry about how they're constructed because they're basically just extruded pieces of Play-Doh. In Revit, pretty much everything you have to put it in with some kind of identity. But we will learn there are ways to work around those deficiencies. Anyway, when you are in certain views, down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a bunch of options. These are kind of akin to the drawing modes in Revit. Remember things like ortho and polar. Down here, let's just take a quick look. Some control how much detail is shown. Some control whether or not a view is photorealistic or not. You might say, why don't I want it photorealistic all the time? Because it slows your computer down. And there are a number of other things, things that control the sun and the visibility of different objects, cleverly using a pair of sunglasses. So anyway, Revit models have a large number of things which happen in different views or when different objects are selected. There are also things, this is called a view cube, which you may or may not have noticed, but that's available in AutoCAD. If you're working in AutoCAD, there are 3D features, and it operates basically the same way. There's a view cube, and this is what's called a steering wheel. These pop up in views where they are allowed. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the floor plan view. I'm just going to close this perspective view here. So one thing that's kind of nice is that if your computer's running a little slowly, you can easily change some aspects of the drawings. For example, I can make it black and white and turn off the sun. I still get a sense of the room, but my computer runs a lot faster, and frankly, sometimes all that color is a little distracting. So anyway, you often end up with a whole bunch of windows open at the same time. I had the floor plan and everything open all at once. One thing you can do, first of all, on the view ribbon, you can switch between different windows pretty quickly. So here's my floor plan, this was the one I was looking at, the kitchen. You can also either cascade the windows, or some people like to do this tiling of windows. You see how now I can see all four views that I happen to have open, and in any of these views I can select an object, and what you'll see is it becomes highlighted. It would be a little hard to see. It becomes highlighted in each view in which that appears. It doesn't appear in this window, so it's not highlighted. So it's kind of cool that way, that you can kind of work and see the effects that it has on different views just by the way you tile things. Now, the other thing is to notice here, and this is the same for all software that we use, really, is that there are keyboard shortcuts. I can't get that to stay open. There we go. See how it says tile windows WT in parentheses. That stands for Windows Tile. If you type in WT as opposed to this one, which is WC Cascade, you will see the view change. I'll just type in, you won't be able to see it, but WT, see how it changes the way the view comes. So learning those keyboard shortcuts is another great thing. I'll have a handout with those shortcuts on it. And there's only a few that are sort of super handy. But again, I find, as with other programs, if you learn those keyboard shortcuts, it just makes you that much more efficient. So back on the floor plan view, and again, as a reminder, you can just find it here in the project browser and double click on it. You can also, if you look up at the top of your screen, there should be a switch windows option. Okay, and it will have all of your available sheets or drawings open. I usually, by the way, keep most of my extra sheets closed just by closing these hidden windows. Just does tend to make the machine a little faster. Okay, I'm also going to close this project browser. Give me a little bit more space here in the properties. So next thing you can do, first of all, in this particular model, and I'm going to click and drag my scroll wheel to move it around, and you can zoom in and out by just rolling your scroll wheel. The direction, for those of you on the Mac, is opposite of the way your regular Mac operates. This is Windows, so everything is backwards. The buttons are on the upper right instead of the upper left on the scroll direction. You can change that, by the way, in your properties, either for Windows or Mac, depending on your mood. Anyway, each of these little question marks that you see actually has further information about whatever it is that they're next to. So, for example, I could click on this learning link, and I'll just jump to the Revit web page that it leads to, and it talks about how the or talks about whatever object you've clicked on. In this case, a section view. Okay, and these are really handy. So I would strongly recommend you click through a couple of these links just to find out about them. This one is about annotations. This one's also about annotations. This one is, I don't know what, also about annotations. Okay, well, there you go. Anyway, other than that, the floor plan should look fairly familiar coming from the AutoCAD world. I'm just going to click on different objects and see what I end up with. If I click on this object, it looks like a wall, and it is a wall. I can tell that by the properties here. Okay, and what you'll see next to the name of the object, there is a little down arrow that you can click on, and you'll see in that down arrow a menu of different kinds of walls. So, for example, if I change this to this one, which was not a very logical wall to make it, but anyway, I'll just change it. What you'll see, the dimension of the wall actually changes because it's a different construction type. Okay, what we tend to do, as first of all, as interior designers, and also as trying to make our lives simpler here during the early stages of the schematic design. First of all, I tend to just use generic wall construction, and I tend to go with this coarse level of detail. And you see how that really simplifies things? I don't see all the internal workings of this wall. And then when I choose walls, I tend to have only a few wall types instead of using some of these which are 1 hour rated, blah, blah, blah. They have all the elements of the wall in them. I usually just use a generic one. It's a lot easier than using the complicated ones. Anyway, all objects in here have some properties of varying sorts. This is a cabinet you can see here. It has its dimensions. This is a piece of text. Whoop, I missed it. There we go. Click on that for a piece of text. So everything within Revit kind of has an identity. This object is a window tag. These objects are rainwater collectors. These objects are Artemis seating lounge chairs. Anyway, so that is the basics of kind of the Revit interface and the objects within it. Some objects are built objects. Okay, so when I click on this, it's a column. It's made of concrete. It has a dimension, a start, and a top level. Okay, so and you can define that in any number of ways. But it's an object that you'd see in a perspective. This object, however, is not a real object. It is what's called an annotation, and it's, let me zoom in on that. It's a room tag. It has the name, the room number, and the dimensions. That does not show up in perspective. Okay, so architectural elements, things that you tend to see, tend to show up on this architecture ribbon. Okay. Other objects, things that you don't tend to see, but are more elements put in to clarify the content of a drawing, things like these elevation markers, text, titles, dimensions, those tend to show up on the annotate ribbon. Okay, and that is sort of the simplest way of looking at how Revit is organized. Now, when you click on an object, another funny thing happens. You get a temporary menu which pops up. And you see here how it says modify / grids. So normally if I have nothing selected, I'll just click off of that object. There is the modify ribbon, and there's a number of tools which I can click on. For example, move, copy, rotate. All tools which are familiar to both users of both Revit and AutoCAD and SketchUp. But when you click on an object, and here, let's grab, we'll just click on, it's a kitchen island. Now you get a special ribbon specific to that object. Now, most of the tools are the same. You can move it and copy it. But this one has a host. It's a hosted object. So it's glued onto a specific spot. Now I'm going to leave my mouse over the tool on the toolbar, and you'll see a video pop up, or sometimes a video, sometimes it's just a still image. This is Revit's way of helping you understand how to use the different tools. So for example, when I choose Edit Family, it has a little bit of information, but there's no cool video. Whereas, let's see, measure between two references, we do actually get a little video that tells us how the software, how this particular tool works. So Revit is really good about helping you to learn how to use it, which is a good thing because it's really complicated. Anyway, what I would strongly recommend to everyone learning how to use the software is to take a look at some of these objects here. Either click on the object and look at its properties, or click on these question marks to follow them through to see what information there is. And then, if all else fails, just start on the architecture ribbon or the annotate ribbon, either one, and just leave your mouse over an object, and you can see a handy-dandy enlarged bit of information about it. That probably will be all you need to know about some of these objects. They're fairly simple to use, at least at the basic level. So that is it for the introduction to Revit. Next time we will start to draw.